This is the first of two videos about population revision for the WJC Spec A paper. So this is what you need to know. You need to know about where people live, why they live there, talking about push and pull factors that produce rural to urban migration and urban to rural migration, and looking at different countries at different levels of development. We also need to look at what will happen to the world's population over the coming years. What are the factors that influence birth rate and death rate, and how do differences in birth and death rate affect population numbers and structures in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and Western Europe, and how may these differences change in the future. So, where do most people live? You could easily get a question like this in the exam. Describe fully the pattern shown by this map for 5 marks. The question is, where do you get your marks from? So we have noting the big difference in population size, noting that it's different from the actual size of the real life countries, describing each continent, naming actual countries. Do not explain. The question just said describe. You are not going to get any more marks if you explain why it is the way it is. Look at the answer below. It says population varies greatly between countries. Asia is the most populated continent, with China and India being by far the biggest. Europe also has a large population, and the UK is drawn bigger than it actually is, showing that it is crowded. Africa and South America each have some very populated countries, Brazil, Nigeria, but are generally quite small, whilst the population of Australia is tiny. Explaining where people live. These are the 3 very important terms that you are going to need to know. Population density is how crowded a place is. It's measured in the number of people per square kilometre. You work it out by taking the total population divided by the total area. You get the number of people per square kilometre. If it's dense or densely populated, it's a crowded area. If it's sparse, there are few people living there. The answers to where we live and why we live there are usually straightforward. It's too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, not enough resources, difficult to get there, too steep, the soil is too thin, all sorts of different things. You need to think carefully and be able to divide them into physical factors and human factors. This is a population density map of the world. Notice in the bottom left-hand corner we have a key. The darker the colour, the more people there are. We can see that Western Europe is densely populated. Across the very northern coastline of Africa, we've got a lot of population in India and China and Japan, but the rest of the world is fairly sparsely populated. Moving to the city, one of the most noticeable things about population studies is that over the last 100 years there's been a flood of people moving to the cities. In MEDC countries there are a high percentage of urban dwellers. People move to the towns, they're attracted by the facilities, the variety of employment, they might even be wanting to live there because their family lives there. But over the last 30 years, the percentage of urban dwellers in LEDC countries is increasing. People are moving for a better life. They're leaving the rural countryside areas, hoping to have a much better life for themselves and their families when they move to the city. They're looking for better jobs, for better pay, for education for their children, a more sustainable food source. But what they usually end up with is living in shanty towns, earning very little money because they lack education. In MEDCs, there is a reversal of this called counter-urbanisation. People are moving from towns and cities to what they perceive to be a better life in the country. They're attracted by the peace and quiet, the larger houses, the good transport links to the city, the peace and quiet, getting away from the rat race, the crime. They see small country villages as being very friendly. Everybody knows each other, whereas in London you might not even know your next door neighbour. They're attracted to the perceived picture that the countryside is better. But the main points we need to consider from this section. The population of world cities is growing rapidly. There are now some megacities. There are over 10 million people living in one area. Most of the growth is happening in LEDCs, and most of the growth happens through rural to urban migration. Some migrants are refugees fleeing danger. Some are economic migrants looking for a better life. People move through a combination of push and pull factors. Push factors make you want to leave where you live. Pull factors make you want to live somewhere else. So having no job is a push factor, but a better education in the city for your children is a pull factor. So how is the population changing? The population of the world hit 7 billion people in November 2011. That is a lot of noughts, and it's set to climb even higher. They believe that the world population will be 10 billion by around 2060. Now, I am not as old as you think I am, and I have seen in my lifetime the 5th billionth person born, the 6th billionth person born, and the 7th billionth person born. So, if it's taken less than 30 years for the population to jump from 5 billion to 7 billion, how much is the population going to be in your lifetime? How high is it going to jump? Now, we already have done some of this work. You should already know what birth rate, death rate and natural increase are. We did them in year 9. Birth rate is the number of babies born per 1,000 of the population per year. Death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 of the population per year. And natural increase is the difference between the two. MEDCs tend to have a low birth rate and death rate. In Britain, our birth rate is approximately 11 and our death rate is about 10, which means we have a very low natural increase rate. LEDCs tend to have a high birth rate, a dropping death rate and a high natural increase. It's quite common in some parts of Africa to have birth rates of 40, death rates of 19 and having a very high natural increase. Death rates will always drop before birth rates drop, as new medicine means that people live longer, but cultural and social factors mean that people still have large families, even though their children will live longer. So why do LEDCs have the highest birth rates? Well, there are a variety of factors. Child labour is just one of them, where people have children to send them out to work in the fields to earn money for the family. They also have children to look after them when they are old. In Britain, we have a pension system. The government will give you money to support you in your old age. It is quite common in lots of countries where there is no pension and there is no work-based pension either. If you do not have family, you will be still working till the day you die. So lots of people want to have big families to ensure that somebody will care for them in their old age. Now, that is more often than not boys. The way that it works in lots of countries is that boys live in the same street or quite often the same family compound as their parents to support their parents when they're older. So girls marry their husbands and move in with their husbands' families. So there is also this big want to have boys, because boys will stay with you throughout their life, throughout your life, whereas girls will leave the family and go and live with their husband's family. So people have big families to make sure there's enough boys to look after them, because the replacement rate is so high. It is an unfortunate fact of life that in some LEDCs, a number of children will not make it to their 1st or 5th birthdays due to poor water to drink, lack of healthcare, lack of immunisation. So the replacement rate, the number of children who are born to replace ones that have already died, is quite high. You also have status. If you have a large family, it is believed that you have the money to support your large family. So therefore, people have large families to cement their status amongst the other people in their town, village, city, that they can look after their family, and because it is so large. You also have the lack of education and the lack of contraception. If you don't know about contraception, then you're not going to use contraception. But if you know about contraception and still can't get any, either because it's too far away or you can't afford it, then either way it's not going to help you, and so birth rates will remain high. So what makes birth rates fall? Women become more educated, so they get better jobs. And because they get better jobs, they tend to have fewer children. They tend to stay in their jobs They earn more money and therefore have fewer children because they don't need to send their children out to work. Children become a cost rather than an economic benefit. Quite often, governments ban child labour. So then you have a number of children who you can't send out to work, so they become a cost rather than an economic benefit. In Britain, bringing a child up to the age of 18 costs roughly the same as a 3-bedroom semi-detached house. Governments can encourage low birth rates by supporting people to have smaller families. Everyone's familiar with the China's one-child policy, where they put into place a lot of strategies to reduce the birth rate, such as people didn't get married till they were older. If you had one child, that would get free healthcare, free education, you would get bonuses at work, that sort of thing. They also encourage people through government sterilisation processes, paying people to have smaller families, penalising them when they have bigger families, and we'll look at that more in the second video. Contraception gets used more widely because people know about it. It's government subsidied. There are education programmes, health clinics promote it, so that more people use it, birth rates fall. So what makes death rates fall? Food security. If you have enough to eat and drink, and it's of a certain quality, and you know that you're going to get the same thing every day that you require it, that will cause death rates to fall. Death rates are often higher when people only drink dirty water, because that's all there is. If you give people clean water to drink, then death rates will fall. Improved healthcare, not just improved drugs, but also access to healthcare. If children are immunised at a young age, they are less susceptible to things that in this country have been eradicated. If they have more money, they can afford better food, they can afford healthcare. We're quite lucky we have the NHS, which gives us our healthcare. Death rates will fall when water, cleanliness and healthcare improve. So, population pyramids. Population pyramids are a way of illustrating how the population of a country is made up. They're sort of like two bar graphs back to back. One for males, one for females. And you can see quite a bit of information from these sorts of things. You can see life expectancy. How long on average do people expect to live? You can work out infant mortality, the number of babies who die under 5. You can look at how many people are economically active between 16 and 65. Those people who earn all the money, who pay all the taxes. You can look at young dependents, those people under 15 who are dependent on economically active people for their needs. And you can see how many older people there are in your country. If we look at this LEDC pyramid, we can see it's got a very wide base, large number of birth rate, high birth rate, large number of children. Large families reflecting early marriages perhaps, lack of education and little family planning. The steep sides show that death rate is high for both the young and adults, and life expectancy can be low with very few people reaching old age. High death rates reflect the lack of medication, clean water and regular food. Shows that population is increasing. If we look at the MEDC pyramid, things are a little different. It's less pyramid shaped. It has a narrow base, with many women having less than 2 children. Women marry later. Contraception is used. Excellent medical care and high standards of living mean the infant death rate is low. Most children live to middle and old age. Death rates are low and only high in extreme old age, which gives the pyramid straight sides. It also shows a gender imbalance, with women tending to live longer than men, meaning that there's a high number of elderly dependents who are female. In the next video, we'll be looking at our case studies that we need to cover for this module.